And of course, they were all appointed by segregation, on the recommendation of segregationist senators in the South, and they were all part of the segregation establishment of the South. And they were confronted with an incredibly difficult task, which many of them showed almost no enthusiasm for, and some others were very courageous about. There's a wonderful book about their situation called 58 Lonely Men. But in any case, nothing really happened about segregation in the South until a decade later, when Congress passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act and said federal money will be taken away from school districts that do not desegregate. And then the federal government began to spell out standards for desegregation, and the Supreme Court adopted them. And by the end of the 1960s, the standard was you have to desegregate completely, totally. You have to reassign the teachers. You have to equalize the educational opportunities. You have to radically do whatever is necessary to create integrated schools to the maximum feasible extent. And under that decision, the South became more integrated than any other part of the United States had ever been, and it remained the most integrated region until 2004. So it was a very long-lasting and very deep effect, and the period when desegregation grew dramatically, and it grew dramatically from the middle 60s to the early 70s, and then it grew gradually up until the late 1980s. Desegregation continually increased slowly for blacks in the South until the late 1980s. That was a period of tremendous increase in black educational achievement. Less than a quarter of blacks were graduating from high school at the time of the Brown decision. There was a very substantial decline in the achievement gap between blacks and whites in that period. There was a huge increase in college going. To what extent that's due to the Brown decision or the Civil Rights Act and to the desegregation process, and to what extent it was due to other things that were happening at the same time, we don't know exactly. But it was a period of really large social progress and really large educational progress. Beginning in 1991, the Supreme Court authorized a return to segregated schools. In a case from Oklahoma City called Dowell, the Supreme Court said, the question that was posed to the Supreme Court was, is integration a permanent responsibility of school districts, or is it a temporary punishment to the white people? And they decided it was a temporary punishment, basically, and that it wasn't a long-term requirement, and that school districts could end their desegregation plans, and they could go back to segregated neighborhood schools. And in subsequent decisions, they not only said they could do that, but they said the federal judges basically should end these things pretty quickly. And in two decisions in the 1970s, they said the schools don't have to be equal. In the Rodriguez case from San Antonio, by 5-4 majority, with 4 Nixon appointees that he got to appoint during his sad term. 5-4 majority in the Rodriguez case said that there was no federal right to education, there was no federal right to equal education, and the federal courts would not enforce equal education. So we still had desegregation in place, but in 1991, that began to be dismantled pretty rapidly. And in 1995, in a case from Kansas City, where the federal judge had tried to desegregate through magnet schools and really hadn't achieved very much yet in terms of educational equalization. And he wanted to go forward to further steps. The court said, no, stop, you've done enough. You can't do anything to consciously try to bring suburbanites into the Kansas City schools, and you can't get money from the state to do anything more. It's enough. So we've gone from a situation where the court was really pressing hard for desegregation to a situation where the court was pressing for resegregation and denying equity. And that's where we are, except one worse step happened in 2006 when the Supreme Court said many forms of voluntary integration are illegal, even if communities want to practice them, in another 5-4 decision. Very strongly supported by the Bush administration.
Good soundbite.
For more information, visit hightechhigh.org.